Welcome to the Brandy Show, Conversations With. The idea for this type of show came from the very concept of podcasts. They're available to anyone at any time since they stay posted on the internet portal indefinitely. Podcasts that are time sensitive, that deal with issues of the day are fine, but after a month or so, they can be out of date. Taking advantage of the technology, it made sense to me to create a program podcast that would last. It's as current the day it is posted to 6 months or a year from now. So I hope you like our series Conversations With. Thanks for stopping by. My conversation today is with Greg Harden. Greg is with the University of Michigan Athletic Department. To explain what he does is impossible. But I can tell you he is as important as Jim Harbaugh and John Beilein to the athletes at Michigan. To get started, we'll call him the counselor at large to athletics. He's more than a counselor, though. He's a life coach and mentor. And he's had major impact on the lives of the likes of Tom Brady and Desmond Howard, not to mention countless others. His story is inspirational and is worth listening to, whether you're an athlete or not. Here's my conversation with Greg Harden. How does a guy get from being, at least what I read in my preparation for this, from a drug and alcohol rehab facility based out of a hospital to the University of Michigan Athletic Department in Ann Arbor? How does one get there?
That's an interesting question, and it's pretty exciting because I got a call from the Dr. Robert Anderson. Said that, we'd like for you to come and do a speech for Michigan football. And I said, well, that's interesting, but you're talking about a 20, 30-minute rah-rah, we love you, just say no, and that doesn't work. He says, yeah, but they told us you were really good at it. I said, I appreciate that, and those who told you that exaggerate, but I tell you what, I can't do it.
You turned them down?
Yeah. And he said, but it's Michigan football. I said, I love Michigan football. I went to Michigan, and I love everything about it, but 20 to 40-minute, this is drugs, this is what they do, doesn't work with 18 to 22-year-olds. And I said, so, but I have a series of questions for you, but let me find out what else are you doing? And if you can give me a clue as to what would happen to a kid, I'd reconsider. But let me give you some names of some other people who might do it. He says, 2 weeks later he calls and said, Bo wants to meet you. Well, I'm young and dumb. I want to meet him.
Young and dumb.
Yeah, and I said, and this is what I want. I want the head coach there. I want you to be there. I want the sport administrator. I want the athletic trainer, all the stakeholders there. And because I need to know exactly what would happen if a kid self-identified as having a problem. He says, okay. Now, I don't know I'm setting up a kangaroo court for myself. I show up, and I've got 21 questions. And I walk in, and Anderson says, Bo, as a cast of characters are sitting around the table at training table at South Quad.
Wow.
I mean, everyone's there. And we have this area where Bo is sitting at the table, sitting me next to Bo, and he says, this is Harden. He's going to tell you about his program. That's not exactly what I had in mind. And Schembechler, of course, looks at me and says, go.
That sounds like Bo.
And it was one of the best experiences of my life because we had a hearty discussion about my perspective, my view of what would really work and what doesn't work. And Schembechler asked me a series of questions and gave his opinion. I disagreed with him in such a way that he respected me. And that was the key piece, was he said something I didn't agree with. But instead of trying to say I'm right and you're wrong, I simply said that's certainly one way to look at it, sir. And there are some alternative views that I'd like for you to consider. And he looked at me and he says, okay, all right. And he says, what would you like to do? I'm so crazy. I don't know any better. I said, I need 6 sessions, an hour and a half each. He laughed and said, you have 3. I never expected to get anything. And he says, you got 3 sessions, and that's how it started.
coming from this drug and alcohol rehab facility at a hospital, and now you're in an academic situation with athletes, some of what you originally were interested in, it changed, and that whole job description kind of grew, didn't it?
Yeah, well, the beauty of it is that Schembechler was so sophisticated that we had hearty discussions about how do you develop young people, because the issue is not just dealing with alcohol and drugs, it's prevention. Try to prevent problems, intervene when there's a problem,
and this is all
retain them.
Right, and this is all in your wheelhouse, right?
This is all in my wheelhouse. But in addition to that, as he shifted into the role of athletic director for a minute, and then Joe Roberson came in, and so I'm doing all these lectures and workshops, but the workshops that I'm doing are not about this is alcohol and this is drugs. We're looking at self-defeating attitudes and behaviors. We're looking at healthy versus unhealthy relationships. We're looking at what does success look like, feel like, what if your life was to work, what would it look like, and what are threats to your dream of being successful.
Was this your dream, this syllabus that you're talking about now? Because it's more than drugs and alcohol. It's about lifestyle.
Let's see, Jim, you the man, because you're opening up the right door. You got to understand that my expertise as it related to my job was clinical therapy, but my consulting was student personal development. My first client was the medical school at the University of Michigan, working with post-baccalaureate students who are trying to demonstrate that they were prepared to go on to the next level and become physicians. My second client was the College of Engineering, Minority Engineering Program Office. And so for me, talking about how to get the best out of people is what I did outside of the clinical therapy piece. So when Schembechler asked me to talk about how would you deal with prevention and intervention, I'm talking about how do you develop people to not self-sabotage. And alcohol and drugs is merely an X factor. It is not the boogeyman. It is simply one of the things that could sabotage a career.
This whole program that you developed, you kind of had to sell it to athletics before. I think you got a full-time job in the athletic department as this counselor in chief, didn't you?
Jim, what you're opening up the door to talk about real talk. You ready? My first assignment. Now, this was a client of mine for 8 years. Joe Roberson came in and says, "But you do more than that, don't you?" I said, "Yes." My first job was special advisor to the athletic director because my background was in organization, organizing communities. My specialty was in group theory and process, in addition to being a specialist on alcohol and drugs. So Robertson said, "Look, we need to take advantage of all the things that you're doing." I'm training people throughout the United States, managers and supervisors and Fortune 100 companies. I'm doing all kinds of things where I have to read scenarios, get union people to work with management. I mean, so I'm in a fool's paradise with Roberson taking over saying, "Hey, come help me." So the next thing you know, I've got an audience. I've got Roberson and Schembechler who are clear that we can start talking about developing athletics differently than we've done in the past. And I'm in the middle of all this.
When you came, did you think this would happen?
Absolutely not. Had no vision, idea.
You had to be like a kid in a candy store with the positive reinforcement you got from Roberson and Bo. And then on forward, you had, well, now Ward Manuel, who's the athletic director. But you had Jack Weidenbach. And Ward, as a matter of fact, was a young man that you counseled when he was in school. Now he's your boss. Pretty amazing trip, isn't it?
Look, talk about adventure. 1986 was the first year that I came in to support what Bo was trying to do. In the first class, Jim Harbaugh was a senior. Ward Manuel was a freshman. Come get out of here, man.
You couldn't write that script. Nobody'd believe you.
You can. No one would believe you.
And with that support, that you got from Ward, now Ward, but all those athletic directors from the time of Bo and Roberson, you've really developed this thing into something really special. At least I think people around the country look at it and say, this is an interesting deal. Have you had people say this is a model?
As a matter of fact, I humbly share with you that Michigan, for an extended period of time, were the front runners in terms of looking at mental health. Because what we did was transition from looking at problems to looking at the whole person. And we started talking about if you're serious about prevention, you're not going to just have someone available to talk to a young person if they're in trouble. You're going to set it up so that they can have someone to talk to about life and the challenges that they're going through. And so we created a formula years before everyone else was talking about it to imitate what I was training and talking to people about in corporate. And that is, how do you get a person to take on daily living problems? I don't need my manager or supervisor to be a clinician. I need them to get me to the EAP, the Employee Assistance Program, to human resources. I don't need coaches to be specialists on alcohol and drugs. I need them to get you to student-athlete support. And that's what we created, a formula by which coaches would have an additional resource. And that ended up being the resource for student athletes. And once you start taking it out of the fantasy that there are two sports, and you begin to see that we have 20 sports, 26 sports, now 30 sports, we had to create a cast of characters that were ideally suited to work with the unique characteristics of the students involved in athletics, whether we're talking about women's sports, whether we're talking about sports that typically, for example, if there's anybody that understands the mental game, it's a golfer.
No question.
They immediately buy in. So we were ahead of the pack for years, and then they caught up with us, and now we're starting to take off again. The NC2A, the Big Ten Conference, everyone now is mandating what we were doing for 20 years.
And you work with athletes. All athletes aren't the same, are they? There are different sports, like high-profile athletes are a little different than, say, wrestlers or, like you said, college golfers. They all have their unique set of issues that you deal with, right?
But they're more alike than people think.
Go on with that.
I mean, think about it. There's a guy or a gal who is identified as an elite athlete on a team that's on television every week. And there's a girl or a guy who's desperately seeking to be identified as an Olympic hopeful. And then there's a person there's no Olympic Games, there's no television, who would do anything to be on a championship team at a Division I level institution like Michigan. And they give everything they've got. And they'll never see the limelight. They'll never be televised. They won't even be interviewed for Michigan Daily. But they're giving everything they've got. And this is their dream sequence.
And you've got to deal with that from them and the guy that is getting more than maybe he wants.
No, everyone says they want to be big time, and then they find out the big time, it's a lot of pressure, unbelievable pressure.
From when you started this in 1986
yes,
to today,
yes,
has that pressure grown?
It has, because the exposure and the expectations have grown. Think about exposure. I mean, you've got social media, you've got all these people who are pseudo reporters, who are doing all they can to make their dream come true. And they want to talk to you. They want to meet with you. They want to videotape you. They want to record you. You've got the expectations, where back in the day, the Rose Bowl, there was nothing bigger than going to the Rose Bowl. So that you want Big Ten championship was like the dream sequence. And now the dream sequence is national championship, period. And the conference championship is an indicator that you might be able to go to the national championship. But back in the day, just being on a team and living that dream and having the local community just excited about, knowing that these are our boys, these are our girls, this is our team, no matter what state we're talking about, no matter what institution, those kids were loved and adored by their local population. And then it goes national. And then all of a sudden, ESPN is created, 24-hour news network. They didn't even know it was going to turn into ESPN. And so now the hunger, the passion to know everything about somebody and to be available to talk at any time. And it's just amazing. And these kids are expected to be more sophisticated, more polished than they ever anticipated having to be. And some of them are so good, it's frightening. Before you have to make sure that these young people understand that you might get interviewed sometime. These kids come in, they've been interviewed since they were 12 years old, and they've got their own website.
As you run into athletes, nothing is really typical amongst the athletes, but as you go through your day and your year dealing with all, 700, 800 athletes
That's
on
940
campus, 940 Division I athletes at the University of Michigan, what's one of those things that you're seemingly always addressing with each one?
How to grow up, how to become a human being, how to see yourself as more than an athlete, and how to see yourself as more than a swimmer, a gymnast, more than a softball player, more than a basketball player, to increase the chances that if you really want to be successful. Imagine telling Tom Brady, Tom, you've got to decide with or without football. Your life is going to be amazing. That's not an easy sell, Jim. But we increase the chances that football will work if his self-worth and self-esteem is not based on football.
So how do you go about doing that to someone who's saying, man, if I'm not a football player, I'm nothing? How do you go about getting them to open that door in their mind that, hey, there is something beyond what I do in the 40?
See, that's a great question. And how do you do it is by listening to what they want. They say they want to be the best. So, but imagine asking a young lady, when did you start gymnastics? 4. Now she's
known nothing else.
She's 19 years old, and how can she not think she's a gymnast? So, how do you get someone to see more? Because they want to be the best. So to be the best, you have to invest in the mental game.
To be the best, you also gathered on what you're saying. You also have to be well-rounded and have that human being behind you, not just the gymnast.
Because the human being is going to go through ups and downs. The human being is going to experience wins and losses, not being injury. They're going to experience so much more. And if my self-definition is limited to I'm a gymnast, if gymnastics is not going well, I fall apart. And so my recovery time is shortened. So I come back faster if I believe in myself as a whole person. I can adjust faster. And I'm in the middle of the basketball game, the Big Ten championship. I'm in the NC2A. And if I don't understand that my self-worth is not on the line, if I make a mistake, then I make 5 more.
It's interesting that you said that. 2 names come to mind. One, you talked about Tom Brady. Mm-hmm. He's a big name here in Ann Arbor. But there's another name out there that you probably never met who said the same thing you did just recently. Golfer by the name of Rory McIlroy. He's one of the best golfers in the world. And yet the other day this year, I remember watching an interview on TV. He said, well, what I've done is quit worrying about what happens after I'm done playing golf. And I don't define that missed putt on 18 that would have won the tournament as what I am.
Ooh, he hit the nail though, because that's harder than people think. But McIlroy is like having a ball win, lose, or draw. So what you try to teach a person who wants to be the best is that they've got to give 100% of the time, win, lose, or draw. And if I've given everything I've got, it doesn't mean I'm happy if we lost. It doesn't mean I'm not PO'd if we get beat by so and so and so and so. But it means that my self-worth and my self-value and my self-esteem and how I feel about me is not on the line. That changes the game.
It does change the game.
And because my confidence and my belief in myself is not based on wins and losses.
One of the famous stories, and Tom Brady has said this, I'm not going to be staying at Michigan if it isn't for Greg Harden. What did you do for him? Was it just that conversation? You said, hey, Tom, what's going to make you happy, football or not?
Yeah.
Is that the only conversation you had?
Well, it's the critical conversation. The critical conversation is, I don't care. Well, the new coach doesn't like me. I don't care what the coach thinks about you. All I care about is what you think about you, Tom. All that matters to me. All I can talk to you about. I can't talk to you about passing the ball. I can't talk to you about reading defenses. All I can talk to you about is believing in yourself, win, lose, or draw, and being prepared to understand that if you put football in the context of simply being what you do and not who you are, we increase the chances that football will work because you're infinitely more than a football player.
When you were talking with Tom as a college junior, sophomore, whatever it was, when he had that moment to decide whether he wanted to stay at Michigan or leave,
yes.
When did you feel the light went on, the door opened for him?
In my opinion, in my experience, he had gotten the starting spot, and he was tentative and anxious. The good news, this guy was so coachable. Desmond Howard, Tom Brady, the most coachable kids I ever met in my entire life. So we're meeting practically every Friday before a game. And so he's had a couple of games where he's starting, and the position is his. This is his junior year. But my job is to monitor, watch, and give feedback. And I'm watching him, and he's so worried about everything. He's looking over to the sidelines. You can see that he's anxious and nervous. So the breakthrough for me that I remember so clearly is we met, and I asked him if he was the starter at Michigan. He said, yeah, I'm the starter. I said, are you sure you're the starter? Because you keep acting like...
Are you taking snaps with the ones?
You keep acting like, you're worried about being... Son, you have earned this. It's yours. So stop being tentative and worrying about what everybody thinks. Again, it goes back to, what do you think? Because these kids will follow you. And if you could have seen his face, and you could see that his confidence was always growing. And at that point, it was clear. I said, bruh, if you get taken out of the game, you get taken out of the game. But you will certainly get taken out of the game if you don't go in clear about your mission and that you in charge.
He just needed that kick in the tail.
Because that's all he needed. Because he was ready. He was primed and ready to go. And he had trained and programmed himself to be the best. But as a real person, fear and self-doubt attack.
And that's the worst thing that can happen to anyone, is fear and self-doubt.
Fear and self-doubt is the greatest enemy anyone will face in their lives.
Another great name and player, and you mentioned him a minute ago, Desmond Howard. Mm-hmm. He's quoted as saying, I don't win the Heisman if it's not for Greg Harden.
I love people who exaggerate to make a point. But,
but hey, that's got to feel pretty good. Nice pat on the back from a guy that's holding the New York Athletic Club trophy.
This kid, man, I have never met anyone. Desmond messed my head up. In fact, that's what.
Wait a minute,
Tom.
He messed your head up.
Did.
You're the one supposed to keep his together.
No. Desmond Howard studied me for a year and a half before he'd even talk to me.
Is that right?
That's who he is. This guy watched me, every move I made, and when we started talking, he made it clear that he had studied me and was
Now that begs this next question.
Mm-hmm.
So when you went and had this conversation with him,
Right.
now all of a sudden you got to be saying, "No, wait, I'm dealing with a different animal here."
He's totally different. I mean, here's a kid who had his parents. You talk about parents. Tom Brady's parents, Desmond Howard's parents, the creme de la creme, because they had prepared those young men to listen to adults, to elderly folk, to to be trainable and coachable. And Desmond was not like Desmond would say, "You tell me what'll work, and then I'll implement it." What do you think will work?
Did he test you also? It sounded like he was a young man that studied you. If he said, "You tell me what'll work," he probably wanted you to give him a reason too, didn't he?
Once Desmond bought in, he was in. It was, once he decided that I was okay.
What got him to buy in? What was that moment?
He was getting ready to leave Michigan. He came in as a running back. He was transitioned into a wide receiver. He was getting no play time. And he was not happy. And so he and another young man, after football, the camp for all the kids, oftentimes our players would be participating and helping. And so after a camp, I had given a lecture to all the campers. And he said, "Could we talk to you for a minute?" And they wanted to chat. And they were like frustrated. And "Can we talk to you?" I said, "Sure." "Is it confidential?" "Yeah, it's confidential." And now, if you're talking about hurting yourself or hurting somebody else, I'm spilling my guts. I said, "No, it's nothing like that." So they were talking about leaving. And Desmond, I said, "What's your rationale?" Desmond was frustrated. And I was intrigued. And when he told me his story, I said, "So, in other words, you're talking about leaving maize and blue to go to purple and gray, or brown and gold, and you don't understand that they're going to expect the same thing from you when you get there." I said, "Well, wait a minute." I say, "So, Desmond, you told me you wanted me to be honest with you. What have you done at Michigan? You tell me how good you are. I have no evidence of that." So I said, "I tell you what, let me go find out why they're not playing you." I say, "Are you comfortable with that?" He said, "Sure." So I do my research. I come back. I say, "Des, you're not playing because they think that you think this is Desmond Howard University."
And that had to be a little bit hard for him to take.
And in addition to that, it's 19 la-di-da-di. If you don't block, you will not get on the field. And Desmond hated blocking. So I said,
So you hit him right in the forehead with that.
He said he wanted me to be honest with him. I said, they don't like your attitude. They don't like the way that you approach the game. You think it's all about you. That's how you're being perceived. Now, you and I know you might not be that guy, but how you're being perceived is this way. And I say, so I tell you what, it is July. So no matter what you do, you can't do it tomorrow. So it seems to me that you need to dig in and demonstrate that you're as good as you told me you were, that you need to walk in August and shock the world, that you need to be willing to be that guy that no one expects to show up 2 days. And he says, "Well, tell me what to do." I said, And this guy was so committed. No one ever saw anything like it. In the summer, when everybody was having a good time, Desmond would be training. In the middle of the night, when it's like 90 degrees in the middle of the day and it dropped down to 70, he would go run in a week, he'd run an additional 10 to 15 miles to get his aerobics up to a whole nother level. He studied everything about the game. And then the only thing that I can tell you that he would share with you, that I asked him to do one thing. And I said, I don't know anything about football, but let me help you with one thing. I need you to piss off the defensive coordinator at least once a week. He said, I said, what am I supposed to do? I said, you're supposed to knock a fool out.
Go block somebody and put them on their back.
Put them on their butt at least once a week. I said, okay. The boy goes out. And blocking got good to him.
When you see a Tom Brady and a Desmond go to the levels that they went to after some advice, do you feel like job well done, or do you feel like a dad that is proud of a young man who kind of beat his own enemy, beat his own demons?
You feel all of that, Jim. You feel all of that. And you know you're not their parent. You know you're not their coach, but you are a mentor. You know that you have given somebody the best advice you can give them. And you know that because you've given it, so let's be clear, you've given it to hundreds of people, but a handful of people will say, this makes sense. And they will not only say it makes sense, they will try to implement it.
And I bet you feel the same way when it's someone from the Olympic sports that is not the highly publicized Desmond or Tom Brady, but someone who is never going to go on and play professionally or never going to go on TV, but during college, I bet you feel the same way when they get it.
There's a kid who, for the first time in life, came in third place in an event, who had never placed before. And you feel like your job is worthwhile because that person will never again be identified as a star. But they have improved dramatically, and they've changed the way their confidence and the way they think and how they see themselves.
Last couple of questions. What we've talked about is athletes, right? Mm-hmm. But the best part about this whole deal is, and I've always said this, athletics teaches you lessons for life. It taught me.
Yes, sir.
And you are talking about lessons that you teach athletes.
Yes.
Yet, in life, anyone can take what you've just told me, apply it to themselves, and be better. Am I right?
You hit the nail on the head, because who I'm talking to, the reason that I believe my stuff works is because I don't see them as athletes. I see them as human beings who want to learn how to give the best that they have. I see them as human beings who want to be peak performers. And peak performance is not just athletics. We're talking about learning how to give 100% 100% of the time. We're learning how to practice, train, and rehearse, being that person who can tap into a part of their brain that says, I'm going for it.
Do you talk and get into, and I'm sure you do, but I want you to elaborate on it. You also teach them lessons of life so they become better fathers, they become better citizens, better people in the community. All those things are part of being, quote unquote, a better human being, right?
Absolutely, sir. And we, at this institution, at Michigan, our coaches have been amazing at recruiting some of the smartest, the most grounded. What people don't understand, you'll have students here who were the presidents of everything in high school.
So they come in here with a pretty good track record.
Some of them come in here ready to take on the world, and all they're here for is to train in themselves into being able to be self-motivated, self-disciplined, driven. And this reinforces who they want it to be. There are dreams that are made here.
One of the things that I read about you was that Ward Manuel, current athletic director, Desmond, and a kid named Walter Smith taught you a good lesson, which you're the guy teaching lessons. All of a sudden, you're learning from them. What did Walter, Desmond, and Ward teach you about your job?
Remember, I came in as a clinical therapist, and I came in as an expert on alcohol and drugs. And the first thing you learn, not just from those three, but from this institution in this environment, you cannot map what you were doing at the hospital into a university or athletics. So I had to readjust my whole thinking about what does it mean to have an alcohol problem, for example. Because on a college campus, based on my training, they were all alcoholics, but they weren't. They were 18 to 22-year-olds trying to figure out life and making mistakes and being stupid and overindulging and finding their limits. And so you first have to learn how to adapt and adjust and begin to see again, this is a different population, this is a different environment, and so you increase your tolerance of understanding. But what Ward Manuel, Desmond Howard, and Walter Smith taught me, that they did not need a shrink. They did not need a clinical therapist. They needed someone they could talk to who had a clue of who they were and how to talk to them in a manner that helped them reevaluate what was working, what was not working. Ward Manuel told me, Schembechler made it clear, I have to come talk to you. I'll come. But you want me to tell you all my business and I don't know you. Who are you? Well, son, you're not here to know who I am. I'm in a role of...
You do a pretty good Eddie Murphy, you know that?
I'm in a very specific role. He said, you can be in whatever role you want. But if I don't think that that you care about me, I'm not telling you anything. I said, so I couldn't sleep for 2 weeks trying to figure out how I needed to adjust and adapt for this community and this population. So what I had to do was recalibrate what I had learned about doing therapy and understand therapy, counseling, and mentoring, and how to when to specifically do one, when to fuse it together, and when not to do it at all. And those boys wanted, they didn't need counseling. They didn't need therapy. They needed a mentor, a friend, someone that they could be straightforward with, and someone that could call them out when they were tripping, dipping, or slipping.
So what would you call your job description? Some people say you're the counselor at large. It sounds like you're the friend of the athletic department that people can go talk to. What would you characterize your job description here?
That guy that didn't know how to get out of the way. No.
That's as good as any.
No, but it allowed me to be multidimensional. It allowed me to be a clinical therapist. It allowed me to be a mentor, and it allowed me to be a friend to young people who needed to have someone to trust and to talk to. And so you can call it life coaching. You can call it peak performance, total person peak performance. I've got all kinds of titles and labels that we can put on it, but we're really talking about trying to distinguish when to play which role and how to do it in such a way that you're still a professional and you're still the authority figure. And that really is the art.
University of Michigan Athletics, lucky to have you, Greg.
You're too kind. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Greg Harden is a fascinating guy and has a fascinating story. He may not be the coach who deals in X's and O's, but he's no less important to the success of Michigan athletics. And if you think about it, Greg's X's and O's over the long run may be more important. Hope you enjoyed today's conversation with. Keep up with more episodes on my Facebook page, Jim Brandstatter 76, or on Twitter at Jim Brandstatter, or the YouTube channel, The Brandy Show, or online at thebrandyshow.com.